Ancient Egypt?
The world of pharaohs, pyramids and sphinxes.
A world of mystery that seems like it takes modern man into an unprecedented distance of time. Tourists from all over the world are drawn to Egypt in an endless stream to touch this mystery. Few of these people doubt the undeniable antiquity of this country.
Since childhood, we have been sure that historians have evidence of Egypt's millennia-old past.
But it turns out that not everything is so simple and obvious. It turns out that not all the information that has come down from the past of Egypt to our time has been deciphered and published. On the walls and vaults of Egyptian tombs and temples, which tourists love to visit, unique images created by skillful artists and astronomers of antiquity have been preserved. These are the Zodiacs. Unfortunately, the majority of visitors to these places do not know anything about them. Moreover, today it is almost impossible to find a publication of a complete image of one or another Egyptian zodiac. At best, you can find photographs of individual fragments. Attempting to take your own detailed photographs of the zodiac in an Egyptian tomb can cause serious problems with local security. Let's try to figure out what is encrypted in these ancient images and why they are so carefully guarded. It is believed that modern science knows a lot, if not everything, about Egypt. According to the official version, ancient Egypt is one of the earliest states in the history of mankind. It arose on the African continent around the beginning of the 4th millennium BC and lasted until the 1st century AD.
It is believed that the heyday of Egypt lasted from 2700 to 2200 BC.
Not much is known about the ancient Egyptians. That they lived under the rule of the pharaohs, who were worshipped as deities, believed in afterlife and mummified bodies of deceased rulers. The mummies of the pharaohs were placed in luxurious and fantastic for their time tombs, the halls of which were decorated with murals and picturesque inscriptions.
According to Egyptologists, the last burials were made no later than the 1st centuries of the Common Era.
This is the official chronology of Egypt. This is how most people in all countries imagine Egyptian history. But where did all this information come from? How do we know what happened thousands of years ago? By whom and when was the antiquity of Egypt established? First, it's worth figuring out when in Europe they even learned about this country.
This is a rather important point of our investigation.
After all, until the end of the 18th century, Europeans knew very little about Egypt. Here is the evidence. In a rather voluminous chronograph of the late 17th century, only a couple of pages are devoted to Egyptian history. It can be seen from the text that the knowledge of the Europeans is scarce, fragmented and rather vague. But everything changes after the victorious campaign of Napoleon Bonaparte in Egypt in 1798 to 1801. In this military campaign, the French army was accompanied by artists and scientists. Artists sketched Egyptian monuments, and scientists collected cultural and household items and tried to systematize them. The so-called Napoleon's description was compiled from the drawings, and the result of the work of scientists was the multi-volume series of publications, Description of Egypt, appearing in Europe at the beginning of the 19th century. These were the first steps of a completely new European science, Egyptology, and the first attempts to date the discovered Egyptian monuments. Nonetheless, how was antiquity of Egypt determined? At the beginning of the 19th century, the French philologist Jean-François Champollion deciphered the hieroglyphic writing on the Rosetta Stone brought to France from that very same Napoleonic campaign. On a granite slab found by the French near the Egyptian town of Rosetta, texts were engraved in 3 languages: hieroglyphs, Egyptian Demotic script, and ancient Greek. The scientist assumed that the texts were identical, compared them, and thus deciphered the Egyptian hieroglyphs. However, it is known that long before Champollion, hieroglyphs were read and understood in Europe. What is strange is it turns out that one could read Christian texts and even entire fragments from the Bible written in hieroglyphic inscriptions. But this fundamentally contradicted the Scaligerian chronology. And then these early translations were declared wrong. And today it is Champollion who is famous as the author of the first grammar and the first dictionary of the ancient Egyptian language. He was also one of the first to declare that the history of Egypt began several millennia BC. But on what basis? Having discovered in the 19th century long lists of some Egyptian names, he immediately decided that these were the names of pharaohs, not high-ranking dignitaries, not just rich famous people, but rulers. These lists were incomplete. There was very little specific information about the reign of a particular dynasty. Therefore, it was extremely difficult to establish the duration of the reign of one or another pharaoh. But Egyptologists found a way out.
For example, the famous 19th century German Egyptologist Heinrich Brugsch did this. For reasons he did not substantiate, he decided to assign about 33 1/3 of a year per pharaoh, based on about 3 pharaohs per century. And thus, counting the number of pharaohs, and deciding that every 3 pharaohs give us 1 century, he moved into the past, thereby counting dates of the old dynasties, of which now there are about 20.
All other Egyptologists agreed with this principle of constructing Egyptian history. At that time, the chronology of the 16th century French scientist Joseph Scaliger had already been accepted.
According to this chronology, the history of Egypt had several thousand years.
And this version was considered quite reasonable. Therefore, in the 19th century, such an Egyptian chronology fit perfectly into the Scaliger's world chronology, ostensibly confirming it. Note that today, after a couple of centuries, the incredibly long history of Egypt does not raise any questions at all.
But this chronology looks very strange, since there are no justifications for such math. And the analysis that we have undertaken shows that the average duration of reigns for rulers of the ancient world is by no means 33 1/3 of a year, but somewhere around 17 years. And even then it varies for different regions.
Thus, the following conclusion can be drawn. Both the chronology of Egypt and Egyptology itself are not based on rigorous scientific research, but on the conjectures of the 19th-century Egyptologists, Champollion, Brugish and others. Meanwhile, they had opportunity to establish the true chronology of Egypt. After all, the bygone generations of the Egyptians left special signs for their descendants, in which they encrypted the exact dates associated with the history of Egypt. The walls of many Egyptian tombs are decorated with rather large paintings, in which, it is thought, symbolic images of the zodiac constellations are depicted.
Similar drawings can be seen under the vaults of temples, and on the covers of some sarcophagi.
These pictures of the nighttime sky are called zodiacs. What is a zodiac? Here is the belt-shaped region of the sky, that is, a circle of 12 zodiac constellations, Aries, Taurus, Gemini and so on. All planets move in this circle, as well as the moon. The sun is also always in this circle. The circle resembles a clock. The zodiac belt is the clock dial. The planets serve as hands that move relative to the constellations. If at a certain hour of the day you sketch the position of the hands on an ordinary clock, it will be clear to everyone what time is indicated in the picture. The same thing happens with the astral clock.
The planets are constantly moving.
Every day one can observe a new position of the planets relative to the zodiac constellations, the sun and the moon. This means that each day has its own astral time on this clock. Astronomers call this time the date of the horoscope. And if today you depict the location of planets visible in the sky, you can be sure that after many years scientists will be able to decipher what day we are talking about.
The zodiacal location of the planets, the sun and the moon is indicated with symbols. The specific position of the planets determines the specific date.
Obviously, when creating a zodiac, the Egyptians wanted to preserve for posterity a date related to a particular construction or important event. This is one of the most famous Egyptian zodiacs, the zodiac from the Dendera temple complex. It was discovered by Europeans in 1799 and taken to Paris. The real zodiac is still in the Louvre. And a replica was placed in the Dendera temple. The replica is quite accurate, although more fine-looking than the original. Because of its shape, this zodiac is often called the round Dendera zodiac. There are many figures here. Among them you can see familiar symbols. A fantastic animal with a fish tail and a goat's head is a symbol of the Capricorn constellation.
The constellation Sagittarius was and is depicted as a centaur shooting from a bow.
And this is Scorpio, a clear symbol of the zodiac constellation of the same name. The symbols of all 12 zodiac constellations are easily recognizable in the zodiac. You can also see the figure of a woman with her hands raised above her head.
This is the Egyptian goddess Nut, or the goddess of the sky, a symbol of the heaven.
Often the female figure has an unnaturally stretched curved body, which bends around the drawing. This sign is constantly present in the Egyptian zodiacs and distinguishes them from other paintings. But is there an indication of a specific date here? Scientifically speaking, is this zodiac a horoscope? What is needed for a symbolic image of a specific date, in addition to the zodiac constellations, the moon and the sun? The planets need to be located in the positions in which they were in the sky on that day.
In the round Dendera zodiac there are many human figures with rods in their hands.
These are symbols of the planets.
Figures with rods in ancient symbolism were associated with movement, and planets are constantly moving celestial bodies.
And these figures in the zodiac are not random, but in a certain order relative to the zodiac constellations. This means that a picture of the nighttime sky is depicted in the round Dendera zodiac. Therefore, a specific date is encrypted.
But what date could the builders of Egyptian temples and tombs encrypt so accurately?
Not far from Dendera, in a bow formed by a huge bend of the Nile, is the city of Esna. In the 19th century, Europeans discovered two temples here, in which zodiacs are depicted. These zodiacs are very similar in their symbolism to the Dendera ones, although there are slight differences among them. Both Dendera and Esna are located in the vicinity of the famous Luxor. The largest of the Egyptian temples were built here. The largest stone zodiacs have been found here. What message might they send us? Probably, the Egyptians encoded in the zodiacs on the ceilings of the Luxor, Dendera and Esna temples the dates of the events to which these temples were dedicated. It was probably a widespread custom. Colorful paintings on the walls and under the domes of sacred buildings tell about significant events, usually of the past. In the temples of Dendera and Esna, in the most honorable place, on the ceiling as well as the under-dome painting in Russian churches, there are zodiacs. This means that the dates encrypted in these zodiacs must have been very important for Egyptian history. But what are these dates?
In the case when the zodiac is depicted, say, over the sarcophagus of the pharaoh or over the mummy of the deceased, then it is obvious that it depicts the date of death or the date associated with the life of this person. Well, most likely the date of death, but at least a date from his life. And here, calculating this date, we get dating of his life and death or some other event. But at least this is the time in the life of a particular person buried here.
Here is an example of the zodiacs of the royal tomb. This is one of the most impressive Egyptian zodiacs. The zodiac in the tomb of Ramesses VI. Like many other tombs, it is located in the Valley of the Kings. The zodiac is painted on the ceiling of the burial chamber, right above the pharaoh's sarcophagus. Most likely, it encrypts the date of birth or death of Ramesses VI, in similar fashion like in the tombs of other pharaohs. There are a lot of such zodiacs directly related to the burial places of kings. It was no coincidence that the Egyptians recorded dates in the form of zodiacs.
They understood that to date this or that event using some kind of calendar era is not a very good idea. Because calendars change, the starting points of the calendar are forgotten. Sure, it is possible to count dates from, say, the accession of this or that pharaoh, but this is also a very shaky way. The time will come when the pharaoh will be forgotten. Therefore, the astronomers of ancient Egypt understood that it was necessary to write the dates somehow more invariantly, in a language that would be eternal, so that their descendants could then understand and read it.
As the ancient Egyptians had hoped, scientists immediately decided to date the zodiacs using astronomical method. That is, to decipher the horoscopes in the zodiacs. In the famous Napoleonic oeuvre titled Description of Egypt, published after the first expedition to Egypt, the zodiacs were called astronomical tables or sculptural zodiacs. No one doubted that they contained information about Egyptian history. 19th-century European astronomers undertook a series of calculations. But after several attempts at dating, the Egyptian zodiacs were declared a figment of imagination of the ancient people, and all research on this topic was curtailed.
For many decades, official science seemed to have forgotten about the Egyptian zodiacs. To this day, the most important information that these ancient signs contain is inaccessible both to the wider scientific community or history buffs. And this did not happen by accident. There are two options. Either historians, Egyptologists simply could not decipher the zodiacs and do not want to admit it, or they still managed to read at least part of these ancient symbols. But the dates obtained during decoding did not at all coincide with the accepted chronology of Scaliger, so they had to be hidden. In the 19th century, astronomers studying the ancient Egyptian zodiacs discovered an incredible coincidence for which they had no explanation. These are the symbols of the zodiac constellations in the very same round Dendera zodiac: Leo, Sagittarius, Cancer, Capricorn. And this is a medieval map of the northern sky by Albrecht Dürer, created, as is commonly believed, in 1515. In the ancient Egyptian zodiac, and on the medieval map of Dürer, the constellations are labeled by the same symbols: Cancer, Leo, Sagittarius, Capricorn. If the Egyptian zodiacs were already known at the time of Dürer, then one could assume that he simply borrowed these symbols from the ancient Egyptians. But Dürer lived in the 16th century, and the zodiacs were discovered only in the 19th. Then why is the Egyptian symbolism, allegedly created several thousand years before the Common Era, no different from the 16th century one? Then the astronomers made one attempt more. They suggested that the Egyptian zodiacs were not so ancient, and were created in the interval from the 1st to the 3rd century AD. According to the official chronology, it was at this time that the dominion of the Roman Empire came to Egypt. The influence of Rome on the culture of the Egyptians could somehow explain the similarity of Egyptian and European symbols. This version was accepted and they started deciphering the horoscopes. And again, failure. During Roman rule, the celestial alignments recorded in the horoscopes were never observed. An attempt to confirm the accepted antiquity of Egypt with the aid of the Egyptian zodiacs failed. The solution to the problem did not match the foregone conclusion. But the existence of the zodiacs in the Egyptian tombs could no longer be hidden. Egyptologists nonetheless had to offer some more or less plausible explanation. And they did offer it, although a completely unconvincing one.
They stated that yes, we know the zodiacs of ancient Egypt, and yes, there are really a lot of them. Yes, indeed, there are constellations, and yes, there are, apparently, planets. But, the Egyptologists said that one should not think that these are horoscopes. One should not think that these are celestial configurations. These are most likely religious scenes, since in the past the planets were often considered gods. Mercury is both a planet and a god. Venus is both a planet and a goddess. Jupiter is both the chief deity and a bright planet.
Let's take another look at the round Dendera zodiac.
This is the symbol of the Sun.
These are the symbols of the planets Venus and Mercury. Both Venus and Mercury in the zodiac are located next to the Sun, that is, where they are supposed to be. The fact is that the planetary motions are subject to certain laws, and when viewed from the Earth, Venus and Mercury cannot be too far from the Sun, and, consequently, from each other.
In a genuine horoscope, they should appear close to each other.
This means that in the Dendera zodiac, Venus and Mercury are not gods, but planets. One may argue that this is just a coincidence. The artist's fantasy unexpectedly coincided with the real celestial composition. But here is another zodiac from the Dendera temple, called the rectangular Dendera zodiac.
And again, Venus and Mercury are next to the Sun.
In our research, we have not come across a fantastical zodiac, which, under any interpretation, gives no solution. We do not know such zodiacs. There are zodiacs that give two or more solutions. If, as Egyptologists say, the zodiacs were really fantasies, then at least in some case this fantasy would lead to the violation of some astronomical laws. Well, let's say Venus would be too far from the Sun, or Mercury would be too far from the Sun. There are certain laws that do not allow every horoscope to appear in the sky. This never happened, even once. The astronomical laws in the zodiacs are always observed, and the resulting date, unambiguously or ambiguously, is always in the historical interval.
If the Egyptian zodiacs are nothing more than figments of the artist's imagination, then why did these artists need to be so precise in depicting positions of the planets, instead of at least letting their imagination run free? A modern artist, depicting a fictional reality, is unlikely to draw the exact location of houses, say, on his street. Why would he? He can afford not to keep proportions right, to invent non-existent objects and so on. But if in every picture the artist depicts streets, houses, trees the way they look in reality, then he does not paint from his imagination, but what he sees every day. In the case of the zodiacs, it is even more precise. The people who created these signs had the goal of the fixing position of the planets and luminaries in the sky and thus preserving a certain date. They did not know that in a few centuries these dates would not coincide with Scaliger's chronology. Many famous astronomers of the 19th century tried to date the Egyptian zodiacs. Dupuy, Laplace, Fourier, Latran, Home, Biot. Their results were negative. Such planetary combinations, that is, horoscopes, did not appear in the real sky, from ancient times to the Middle Ages. For later epochs, they did not dare to make calculations. Thus, it can be argued that astronomers of the 19th century, brought up with the Scaliger chronology, after all looked for dates in the zodiacs that could become irrefutable confirmation of the deep antiquity of Egypt. But they did not find such confirmation. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian scientist Nikolai Morozov got interested in dating the zodiacs of the Dendera temples. He was the first to propose dating the Egyptian zodiacs according to their astronomical content, without looking back at the traditional Scaligerian chronology. Morozov proved that the astronomical dating of the Egyptian zodiacs cannot in any way give the dates Egyptologists need. The solution must not be sought in a narrow period of time, but throughout the history of mankind. However, neither Morozov himself nor scientists who developed his methods could offer the exact dates, indisputable for each of the zodiacs.
Egyptologists and their astronomers, who worked for them, set a time interval, and Morozov, who did not believe in the Egyptologists' time intervals, was still limited in his calculations and still could not sort through too many options. Anyway, he had to choose one from some purely speculative considerations, from a number of possible interpretations. He just could not calculate everything.
In order to make sense of all possible solutions and choose the right one from several suitable ones, additional information was needed. In 2001, Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nozovsky developed a new dating method, the method of the complete deciphering of the Egyptian zodiacs. They found out that the additional information that scientists previously lacked is in the zodiac itself. The ancient Egyptians took care of that too.
We discovered an amazing thing that no one seemed to have noticed before. The fact is that, as it turned out, not just one zodiac was depicted in an ancient Egyptian zodiac, but often several. That is, not one horoscope, but several horoscopes. One horoscope, which we called the main or primary, is the horoscope that holds the date that the ancient astronomer and artist intended to record in this image. In addition, in this zodiac, Egyptian astronomers and artists also depicted astronomical information related to this year.
Fomenko and Nozovsky perceived that the additional signs of the planets in the zodiacs are not accidental, they also make up horoscopes. Scientists called them secondary. A secondary horoscope is the position of the planets on the days of the spring and autumn equinoxes and on the days of the winter and summer solstices. And to avoid confusion, the planets were depicted using different symbols. The planets of the main horoscope were drawn simply, in the form of figures with rods. And in the symbols of the planets of secondary horoscopes, these figures or rods were necessarily placed on an object or on an animal. Most often you can see figures on a boat or on a snake. This greater amount of information made it possible to accurately record the desired date. The Egyptian zodiacs almost always have secondary horoscopes, and the Fomenko and Nozovsky method is precisely based on the fact that secondary horoscopes make it possible to verify and clarify the decoding of the main horoscope.
The amazing discovery that we made in 2002 was that in the zodiacs, as it turned out, all the figures carry an astronomical meaning. And that in addition to images of the 7 planets of antiquity and their astral places in the zodiac constellations, there is still additional astronomical information. These are also planetary figures, and they didn't turn out to be just a portrayal of some naive fantasies. But these are figures that carry a clear astronomical meaning, complementing the horoscope and allowing not only to unambiguously calculate the date, but also to confirm the decoding.
Mathematicians have proposed an absolutely clear decryption algorithm. First, all the planetary symbols of the main horoscope and their positions in the zodiac constellations, the Sun and the Moon, are determined. Then begins the search for all dates in the given historical interval. To do this, the Horus computer program is used, which was specially created by Fomenko and Nozovsky for zodiacs dating. The disposition of the planets in a certain zodiac and the time interval within which the date must be searched are entered into the program. Finally, all calculated dates are verified. The verification is carried out based on planets' visibility, their positions and compliance with the secondary horoscopes of this zodiac. There must be a complete match with the actual celestial representation of the given year. If there is a match, the date of the zodiac is determined. But the method of Fomenko and Nosovsky allows for deciphering the dates of those zodiacs that do not have secondary horoscopes as well, that is, when additional astronomical information was not provided. Such zodiacs are often found in Europe. For example, the zodiac on the old tapestry from the French city of Bayeux, the Bayeux Tapestry. Numerous tapestry researchers never noticed that there was an astronomical zodiac in this drawing. True, it was sometimes said that it depicts individual zodiac constellations. But that's all. The origin of this medieval cultural artifact is rather mysterious. The tapestry itself is a linen cloth about 70 meters long. In the center are embroidered scenes related to certain historical events. And the borders along the edges are decorated with symbols that scientists for some reason did not try to decipher. The decryption turned out to be very interesting. Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky realized that all the zodiac constellations are observed in the embroidered borders of the tapestry, from Leo to Virgo and back. That is, the pattern is cyclic. And this is nothing but an astronomical zodiac. The planets are depicted as human figures walking or standing on both legs. This is also common symbolism of the planet wayfarers. But in the tapestry from Bayeux, there are only planets of the main horoscope. There is no auxiliary information. Only the Sun is duplicated in an additional small golden male figure next to Gemini. This way the summer solstice is marked. As we have already mentioned, there are no secondary horoscopes in the Bayeux tapestry zodiac. According to the official account, the tapestry depicts the Norman conquest of England by William the Conqueror in the 11th century. And the tapestry itself was supposedly made around the same time. But independent astronomical dating using the Fomenko-Nosovsky method gave a completely different date. The date March 15, 1495 is encrypted in the zodiac of the tapestry, and this is 4 centuries later than the official date. This means that it is possible that completely different historical events are depicted in the tapestry. Thus, the dating method of Fomenko and Nosovsky makes it possible to decipher all the ancient zodiacs. It takes into account the fact that there may be a lot of solutions that need to be inspected. The given time interval should be very long and not limited to the usual historical periods. Only in this way can a truly correct solution be found. However, the date obtained may not at all coincide with the expectations of historians. During the Napoleonic campaign in Egypt, European scientists discovered a stone bas-relief measuring 25 by 42.5 meters on the ceiling of the temple in Dendera. It consisted of 2 strips of images running along opposite sides of the ceiling, as if covering the space from both sides. Europeans called it the rectangular Dendera zodiac. The first Egyptologists estimated its age as 15,000 years BC. Though later, scientists shifted the dating of this zodiac to the beginning of the Common Era. Using the method of Fomenko and Nosovsky, we will check how old the Dendera zodiac really is. Will the official version be confirmed? For our study, we will use a drawing from the publication, Description of Egypt. The authors of the New Chronology believe that today this is the most accurate representation of the rectangular Dendera zodiac, because the zodiac itself has lost some details of the original image after restoration. And without these details, it is impossible to get an accurate decoding. So, step 1. The figures of the zodiac constellations in the rectangular Dendera zodiac are easily recognizable. These signs are similar to those of the constellations in other zodiacs. The planets of the main horoscope are represented as wayfarers with rods, also a traditional symbolism. Saturn, a male wayfarer with a planetary rod in his hand to the right of Aquarius, with a crescent over his head, is in the region of Aquarius or Capricorn. Jupiter is a male wayfarer with a planetary rod in his hand between Pisces and Aries. Next to his head is an inscription, Hor Apis Theta, which means the planet Jupiter. Mars is a male wayfarer with a planetary rod in his hand and the head of a falcon between Pisces and Aquarius. Venus is depicted as two wayfarers following one after another, with planetary rods in their hands between Aries and Taurus. Ahead is a man with the head of a beast, and behind him is a woman with a star above her head. The star means that Venus was visible at that moment, which is very important for deciphering. Mercury is a two-faced male wayfarer with a planetary rod in his hand between Aries and Taurus. He does not have a star above his head. That is, Mercury was invisible that day. The location of the planets of the main horoscope is determined. There are few figures of secondary horoscopes here. They are also easily recognizable. They either stand on some objects, or put their rod on them. Here, for example, is a woman with a rod, which she put on Capricorn. Two women in a boat to the left of Gemini. A man with a planetary rod, standing in a boat between the constellation Gemini and the edge of the zodiac. The female figure with a rod on Capricorn is Venus. The sun bird on the woman's shoulder is the sign of the winter solstice in the Egyptian zodiac. This is the horoscope for the winter solstice. And in the year, which is encrypted in the rectangular Dendera zodiac, Venus was in Capricorn that day. The two women in the boat is also clearly a sign of Venus. This planet is generally quite often found in secondary horoscopes. Nearby are the symbols of the summer solstice, customary for Egyptian horoscopes. A boat that carries a calf lying in it. The perch with the solar bird on top of it. A man in a boat near the constellation of Gemini, holding his rod high, is most likely also a symbol of the sun. All figures together make up a secondary horoscope of the summer solstice. Female figures are quite close to the constellation Taurus. And this means that in that year Venus on the day of the summer solstice was in Taurus or close nearby. Other planets were not visible. The secondary horoscope of the spring equinox in this zodiac is not very clear. There is only a male figure that makes an offering. It can be identified as any planet at all, excepting Venus, which was near the sun that day. On the other hand, the autumn equinox horoscope is quite detailed. You can see a female figure with a leonine head next to the sign of the constellation Virgo. This is Venus. Moreover, the leonine head is equipped with a crescent in the form of horns. The crescent in this case is the symbol of the moon. And the whole horoscope says that on the day of the autumnal equinox in the indicated year, Venus and the moon were visible and were not far from the sun. There were no other planets in the vicinity of the sun. Thus, all secondary horoscopes in the rectangular Dendera zodiac are deciphered. Step 2. Using the Horus software, all dates are calculated when the disposition of the planets in the sky corresponded to their location in the rectangular zodiac. There must be an exact matching of the planetary disposition between the solution and the rectangular zodiac. Solutions that do not meet this condition are not accepted. Historians believe that this zodiac was composed no earlier than the beginning of the Common Era. Therefore, to search for solutions, a time interval is set from 500 BC to 1900 AD. We get several dozen preliminary dates, randomly scattered throughout the specified period. And finally, step 3. Another computer software is used for verification. Volinkin's Turbo Sky astronomical program.
Firstly, the exact agreement between the real location of the planets in the zodiac constellations and the picture of the rectangular zodiac in the chosen interpretation is verified.
Secondly, the exact visibility conditions are to be observed. Venus must be visible on the day in question, and Mercury must be invisible between Taurus and Aries. Thirdly, the exact correlation between the chosen solution and all secondary horoscopes in the rectangular Dendera zodiac is estimated. That is, the horoscopes of the autumn and spring equinoxes and the winter and summer solstices. So, the rectangular Dendera zodiac, which historians attribute to the first centuries of the Common Era, contains the date, April 22 to 26, 1168 AD.
The second zodiac, the round one, the most famous zodiac of Egypt. This round one, it is small, on the ceiling of this little chapel, located on the roof of a large temple. Its date is March 20, 1185. These two dates, they are close to each other. The difference is about 17 years.
According to the official chronology, the history of ancient Egypt began over 4,000 years ago and ended in the first centuries of the Common Era.
The temples and tombs of the famous Valley of the Kings were allegedly built during this period.
In 2002-2003, Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nozovsky deciphered several dozen so-called ancient Egyptian zodiacs. And the very first results of studying the zodiacs using the method of independent astronomical dating disproved the official version. It turned out that the dates of the Middle Ages of the Common Era are encrypted in the zodiacs.
From our dating, it follows that all the known ancient Egyptian history, including all the events known to us from the history of the pharaohs, occurred no earlier than the 10th century AD.
Here are the dates of the Egyptian zodiacs, obtained using the complete decoding method. The zodiac of the Seti I gives either August 14 to 16, 969 AD, or August 5 to 7, 1206 AD. There are two options, and Egyptologists date the reign of Seti I to the 13th century BC. The zodiac of the Big Temple of Esna, March 31 to April 3, 1394 AD.
The zodiac of Ramesses IV is either April 15 to 16, 1146 AD, or April 16, 1325 AD.
There are also two options.
And according to Egyptologists, the reign of Ramesses IV is the 12th century BC.
The Thebes color zodiac of Ramesses VII, September 5 to 8, 1182 AD. But traditional history assures us that the reign of Ramesses VII is the 12th century BC. We see that the dates written in the zodiacs differ by more than 2 to 2,500 years from the dates established by historians.
Moreover, there is a separate case, rather rare, when the famous Brugish zodiac dates by the middle of the 19th century. This is a special case. Apparently, in ancient Egypt there was a practice of making ancient coffins and writing dates on them in the form of zodiacs until the 19th century.
It is quite possible that European astronomers of the 19th century, having deciphered the ancient zodiacs, got precisely these dates. Therefore, further research was tabooed.
Too much this information diverged from the traditional version of the development of human civilization. But the studies of Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nozovsky, their method of the complete decoding of zodiacs, proved that the history of Egypt, as well as the whole world history, is very different from the one we know.
In our opinion, the rejection of our results by historians is caused by one reason: the unwillingness of historians or their inability to work in the field of chronology, in the discipline of dating. Historians want to consider chronology as an unchanging dogma, absolute truth, and start from it. That's what they want. Moreover, since many previous generations of historians have already worked with the Scaligerian chronology, they really do not want to abandon it, realizing that they will have to do it all over again to work with the new chronology.
Therefore, as in the case of Morozov's work, Egyptologists try not to discuss the zodiac's dating, because they are completely objective and anyone can double-check our result and make sure that the dates from the Middle Ages are obtained. And it is clear that these dates are very dangerous for the chronology of Scaliger Petavius. That is why historians try to avoid this discussion and obscure the issue with references to the supposedly religious and mystical meaning of these images.
None of the dates deciphered in the Egyptian zodiacs confirms the chronology of ancient Egypt generally accepted today. On the contrary, these dates completely refute it.
Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nozovsky proved that all the Egyptian zodiacs known today were created in the period from the 11th to the 19th century AD.
This means that the history of ancient Egypt is several thousand years younger than the one that historians impose on us. It is not surprising that they stubbornly reject these dates and call them random. But if all these dates are random, then why didn't any of them accidentally fall into that period of time that would suit the historians of the Scaligerian school? Historians cannot answer this question. But the answer is given by the new chronology. And these are not speculative assumptions that Champollion or Bruges did in their time, but serious scientific research based on modern mathematical methods. Not only the history of ancient Egypt, but the whole world history puts forward many questions, the answers to which cannot be obtained remaining within the framework of traditional history and chronology. The Scaligerian historians often confused not only the time, but also the place of historical events, confused the names of countries and cities. Find out in our next film. Lord Novgorod the Great, who are you?